I never thought someone could try to sell my life back to me with a wooden stake and a glossy flyer. But there I was, brakes screaming, coffee sloshing, staring at a for sale sign planted dead center on the private road I'd graded myself last spring. You don't expect a realtor to be the first person to tell you your existence is negotiable, but apparently that's a thing now. Sun River Realty, viewings by appointment only. As if the lake and the porch and the way the light hits the cedar steps were a boutique amenity. When I rolled closer, there was a black SUV by the woodshed and a woman in heels circling my porch with a clipboard like it was a movie set. Two strangers were photographing the windows like they were scouting for an Instagram post. "Excuse me," I said, because apparently I was being polite about trespassers now, and their smiles faltered. The agent had that rehearsed, oh, hi look that evaporates when someone says, "No, actually, this is my house." I told them my name. Randy Thorne said I'd owned the place for 15 years and watched their faces go through a few stages of confusion before the realtor fumbled for her iPad and produced a PDF like it would calm everything down. I called the sheriff. Deputy Rollins Local, steady, the kind of guy who knows where every rattler hides and who once showed up to escort a drunk teen off my dock, came out, walked the line with me, and told me two things that made me both relieved and furious. First, they're out of bounds. And second, if you want to press charges, we'll document it. He took plates, snapped pictures, and I dug that sign out of the dirt myself and chucked it in my truck bed, hot anger making my arms steady. At night, I couldn't sleep, not because of storms or snakes, but because someone had tried to rewrite reality with a few printed pages and a confident signature. Dawn found me in Safford at the assessor's office, the kind of beige government building where things happen slowly until they suddenly matter. Lyle, tired-eyed patient, the man who handles boundary weirdnesses, read my file and blinked at his monitor. A Form 334-Z had been submitted, an abandonment and reassignment notice signed by a Karen Wolford listing herself as acting steward of the Sun River Bluffs HOA. She claimed the parcel was unregistered derelict with no verified owner. That some person could take photos through trees, scribble a notarized affidavit, and feed it to a system that trusts paperwork by default that pissed me off in a new specific way. It wasn't just one clumsy attempt. Over the next week, odd things stacked up like a bad hand of cards. A call came in saying Sun River had reported me for trespassing at a community structure. Tire tracks appeared down by my canoe, and an email asked about lake access permits, as if someone was researching how to turn my porch into a retreat. Karen hadn't stumbled on a process. She'd tried to weaponize it. She had a plan, and worse, she had convinced enough systems to at least pretend the plan had merits. Then she showed up in person. The chain I'd bolted across the service road was cut clean. A silver Lexus rolled in, and Karen stepped out as if she'd been rehearsing the scene. Bleach blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like scripture, with two men in khakis and windbreakers wearing IDs that looked official enough to make you stop breathing for a second. She announced that the property was under temporary HOA stewardship, pending title clarification, quoted ordinances with the kind of certainty people live by when they're trying to scare you into compliance, and smiled like she was doing me a favor. That's when she dialed 911 and described me as an aggressive squatter. She had a script and she ran it loud. Deputies arrived. Karen performed. I spread my papers out on the patio table, deed tax receipts, dating back to the first Bush assessor letters, and let the law read its own language. The deputies read and then finally looked at Karen and told her the parcel was private and not in her HOA's boundary. She left with a promise on her record false report, maybe a county complaint. Relief tasted like cold coffee. But I'd seen how she'd weaponized paperwork and public services, and I didn't want to wait for the next escalation. Enter Marissa, my attorney, brilliant, sharp, the kind of woman who's been through divorces, land fights, corporate suits, and come out with a ledger of scars and wins. "Do you want to crush her legally or permanently?" she asked with that wry tilt. I knew she was joking, but also knew the difference. One route is courtroom paperwork, the other is leverage that changes the power dynamic overnight. We looked at public records and we found her weak point. Karen's house, a stucco two-story near the Sun River entrance, was loaded with a reverse mortgage and had unpaid taxes. The mortgage had been bundled and sold off. The new holder was a Phoenix asset fund on the edge of pre-foreclosure. In other words, opportunity. We moved quiet and surgical. Marissa set up a holding trust with no obvious ties to me, contacted the asset manager, and bought the lien. When the paperwork cleared, notice of default was issued, a trustee sale scheduled. We didn't gloat. I stayed away from the cabin and let Karen imagine she had the upper hand. At auction, Marissa denim jacket, mirrored shades, bought the note uncontested. The house was ours the moment the gavel fell. I didn't march in with a band or a banner. I served notice, changed the locks, printed a sign that read "New ownership, direct inquiries to Randy Thorne," and sat across the street with iced tea and binoculars like someone watching a slow, small play. When Karen returned, she found an orange notice, a new deadbolt, and me parked like a calm punctuation mark. She screamed, she pounded the door, she accused me of theft. I held up the deed and county stamps and watched the moment the script flipped in her head. She called 911 again. This time the officers assured her unless she could prove fraud in court, she was trespassing. They gave her 72 hours. The twist, the little thing that made the whole saga feel deliciously kinetic, was that her overreach had repercussions beyond our duel. Neighbors filmed her meltdown, board members started resigning, internal emails leaked that showed she was trying to reclassify non-HOA cabins as rogue dwellings, basically building case files to expand her reach. The assessor's office flagged another attempted fraudulent filing using the same notary stamp, and the district attorney opened a criminal investigation. Falsifying public records, fraudulent claims of ownership, criminal misrepresentation. Suddenly Karen was the subject of an official inquiry, not just the villain of my story. There were civil suits, of course. She sued me for emotional distress, and I countered with notarized deeds, transcripts of her 911 calls, and affidavits from rangers who'd patrolled the lake. More significant was the practical aftermath. Her presidency was revoked, her legal counsel withdrew, and a warrant would eventually be issued. When law enforcement led her away, I drove up to the cabin, poured a beer, and watched red and blue lights fade into the early dusk like some final punctuation. And then came what felt like the nicest part. I didn't turn her property into some petty trophy. I turned it into something that mattered. Karen's old house became Cabin 2, a community guest lodge for disabled veterans and retired first responders. Same roofline, different soul. Folks from Sun River stopped by with paint and supplies. Veterans who stayed there told me it was the best place they'd slept in years. There's a little bronze plaque now that reads, "Former residents of Karen Wolford, confiscated, renovated, redeemed," and below it, smaller letters, "Your HOA does not reach this far." If you want a tidy moral here, it is awkward and true. Systems can be gamed by people who understand the rules. But those rules are also navigable by folks who refuse to be silenced. Power shows up in stamps and notarized pages and authoritative tones, and sometimes the only way to stop abuse is to learn the game better than the abuser, not to become them, but to strip their tools and put them to some other use. That's not a sermon. It's a practical, slightly ugly truth I learned standing on a porch watching the light hit cedar steps. So yeah, there was satisfaction, the slow, reluctant kind, because I didn't dance on anyone's ruin. I just made sure the scales were balanced again. I still fish off that porch, still fix the squeaky step, and sometimes I imagine Karen in a different life using her smarts for something kinder. But when I walk past Cabin 2 and see veterans unloading bags, or when a neighbor nods and says, "Good call," there's a small, clean pleasure that settles in. What do you think? Is it justice when the law takes back what someone tried to steal with paperwork, or is it still a kind of vigilantism, wearing legal clothes? Tell me about a time you stood up to someone who thought paper could rewrite your life, or if you haven't, what would stop you from doing it? Share this if you think systems should protect people, not power, and drop a comment with your story.